Number 1. Robert Reed. When you look at Mike Brady, you see the architect of the perfect blended family. Robert Reed played that role with such a steady, reassuring presence that millions of viewers genuinely wished he was sitting at the head of their own dinner table. But the reality of working on the Brady Bunch required Reed to construct a completely different kind of architecture off camera. The network wasn't just selling a television show. They were selling an idealized mid-century American morality. And in the early 1970s, the executives writing the checks for primetime television had zero tolerance for a leading man who didn't fit that rigid mold. Reed was gay, a fact quietly understood by his co-stars and many on the Paramount lot. Florence Henderson, who played his on-screen wife, later noted that the cast simply protected him. They understood the stakes. If the press caught wind of his private life, it wouldn't just freeze Reed out of the industry. It would instantly dismantle a multi-million-dollar franchise built on traditional values. So, he compartmentalized. Reed was a classically trained actor who often felt frustrated by the sitcom's simplistic writing, yet he anchored himself to the financial security it provided. That security came with the intense, daily anxiety of keeping his public image spotless. He had to navigate a studio system that demanded a comforting authenticity on screen, but actively punished it once the cameras stopped rolling. When his health eventually failed him in the early 1990s, the intense media scrutiny he had spent decades outrunning finally caught up. Reed passed away at 59, the man who stepped into our living rooms every Friday night to solve family problems with a gentle smile spent his career locked in a system that forced him to fade into the background of his own life. Number 2. Dick Sargent. Taking over a beloved character on a hit television show is an unenviable task. When Dick Sargent stepped into the role of Darren Stevens on Bewitched in 1969, he wasn't just replacing an actor, he was adopting the mantle of the quintessential American husband. Darren was an advertising executive, a man who represented standard suburban normalcy, constantly trying to keep his magical wife grounded in a conventional reality. For Sargent, maintaining that illusion of middle-class domesticity required an exhausting performance that didn't end when the director yelled "cut." The late 1960s were a volatile time for the television industry. Gossip publications held the power to dismantle a career in a matter of days. If the press found out that the man playing Samantha's sensible, straight-laced husband was gay, the network and its advertisers would have vanished overnight. So, Sargent played the corporate game. He attended industry events with female companions and kept his private world fiercely guarded. You can see a strange paradox in his television work. A man hired to play a character who is perpetually stressed about keeping his household secret, all while guarding a much heavier reality of his own. The industry demanded that he be a believable romantic anchor for one of television's biggest stars. He delivered, but that requirement meant completely erasing his own truth in the public eye. It wasn't until 1991, long after the studio lights had dimmed and his health began to fail, that Sargent decided he was done managing the illusion. He publicly acknowledged his identity, stepping away from the fictional suburban framework that had defined his image. He spent his final years as a visible advocate, finally able to speak in his own voice after a lifetime of delivering network-approved lines. Number 3. Paul Lynde. Paul Lynde had a very specific way of pausing before delivering a punchline. Whether he was popping in as Uncle Arthur on Bewitched or holding court in the center box of the Hollywood Squares, he always wore a signature smirk. It was a look that told the audience he was in on a joke they didn't quite understand. The networks loved that smirk. Lynde was a comedic force, hired precisely for his flamboyant, highly animated persona. His career is perhaps the most glaring example of television's glass closet. The industry was more than happy to monetize his campy mannerisms. They gladly let him play the eccentric, sharp-tongued bachelor because he was a guaranteed ratings draw. Yet, the unspoken network rule was absolute. He could hint, he could deliver endless innuendos, but he could never actually confirm his identity as a gay man. It was a baffling double standard. The entertainment machine extracted everything that made Lynde unique, packaging his personality for millions of American living rooms. At the same time, it stripped him of the basic dignity of acknowledging his own reality. The executives and producers knew exactly who he was, but they also knew that in the 1960s and 70s, conservative advertisers would pull their funding the moment a profitable caricature became a real person. Lynde spent his peak years walking an exhausting tightrope. He He was one of the most recognizable and relied upon comedians of his era, tasked with bringing daily levity to the public. But his massive success was entirely conditional. The studio system rewarded him with wealth and fame, so long as he agreed to remain a two-dimensional punchline rather than a fully realized human being. Number 4. Jim Nabors. When Jim Nabors stepped onto the set of The Andy Griffith Show, he introduced audiences to Gomer Pyle, a character defined by absolute, unblemished innocence. With his booming voice and wide-eyed catchphrases, Nabors became the embodiment of small-town, rural American wholesomeness. The network quickly spun him off into his own massive hit, Gomer Pyle, USMC, banking heavily on that uncomplicated, folksy charm. But maintaining the illusion of Mayberry required an extraordinary level of personal discipline. In the 1960s, CBS wasn't just broadcasting a sitcom, they were guarding an enormously profitable brand. Any deviation from the traditional image Nabors projected would have jeopardized millions in advertising revenue and syndication deals. The studio needed Gomer Pyle to remain a perpetual, non-threatening bachelor, and by extension, they needed Nabors to do the same. Off-screen, Nabors lived a quiet, fiercely protected life. He met his partner, Stan Cadwallader, in the mid-1970s, and the two built a life together that spanned nearly 4 decades. Yet, for the vast majority of his public life, the man who entertained presidents and made the nation laugh had to ensure his domestic reality remained entirely invisible. He couldn't attend industry events with the person he loved or speak openly about the most foundational relationship of his life. Nabors rarely expressed bitterness about this arrangement, seemingly understanding the harsh, uncompromising mechanics of the era he operated in. He simply compartmentalized, separating the beloved television icon from the private man. It wasn't until 2013, at the age of 82, that Nabors formally married Cadwallader in Washington state. After spending his peak years carrying the heavy weight of a network's idealized rural fantasy, he finally allowed his actual enduring love story to be placed on the record just a few years before his passing. Number 5. Hayden Rorke. As Dr. Bellows on I Dream of Jeannie, Hayden Rorke was the ultimate figure of mid-century authority. He spent his days on screen furiously trying to uncover the unexplainable secrets of an astronaut. The irony is striking. While his character was obsessed with exposing the truth, Rorke was forced to construct an impenetrable wall around his own. In the 1960s, a sitcom anchored by the U.S. military and traditional gender dynamics had absolutely no room for a gay actor in a recurring, authoritative role. Rorke lived quietly with his partner, television director Eustace Addis, for decades. Yet, to the press and the studio executives at Screen Gems, he had to present as a dedicated, lifelong bachelor. The industry required him to project a rigid, buttoned-up professionalism, essentially asking him to police his own behavior as strictly as his character policed Major Nelson. Rorke didn't rely on the flamboyant, campy defenses of some of his contemporaries. His survival strategy in Hollywood was quiet, absolute assimilation. He blended seamlessly into the established studio machinery, attending the right industry functions, and maintaining the exact level of visibility his contract implicitly demanded. The arrangement was strictly transactional. He provided the network with a reliable, grounding presence for their highly profitable, fantastical comedy. In exchange, the system didn't look too closely at the life he had built away from the backlot. Rorke managed to maintain this quiet equilibrium until Addis passed away in 1979. He secured his place in television history by brilliantly playing a man who demanded answers, all while successfully ensuring the American public never asked him any. Number 7. Nancy Kulp. As Miss Jane Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies, Nancy Kulp was the reliable punchline of a very specific mid-century Hollywood joke. The network positioned her as the quintessential spinster secretary, rigid, overly educated, and perpetually desperately pining for the rugged masculinity of Jethro Bodine. For 9 seasons, millions of viewers tuned in to laugh at a woman whose entire comedic identity was built around her failure to secure a conventional husband. The paradox of that role is profound. While CBS was busy mining her fictional romantic frustrations for ratings, Kulp was quietly navigating the industry as a lesbian. She was a highly intelligent former naval officer with a background in journalism. Yet, the television landscape of the 1960s only had one acceptable box for a woman who didn't fit the traditional bombshell mold. They required her to play the caricature of female desperation. To stay employed on one of the most profitable sitcoms in the country, Kulp had to lean into that exact stereotype. She understood the mechanics of the era perfectly. If she had challenged the studio's rigid definitions of womanhood or attempted to live openly, she wouldn't have just lost her role. She would have been entirely erased from casting directories. The network was highly protective of its rural comedy block, and there was absolutely no margin for anything that threatened the conservative family values they were selling to middle America. So, Kulp maintained a fiercely guarded perimeter around her private world. She endured years of playing a character defined by the absence of a man, while purposefully hiding the reality that she simply wasn't looking for one. It wasn't until 1989, in the twilight of her life and long after the studio contracts had expired, that she finally gave an interview subtly confirming her truth. She quietly reclaimed her identity from a television machine that had spent a decade profiting off a fictionalized version of her loneliness. Number 8. Charles Nelson Reilly. Charles Nelson Reilly never really tried to blend into the traditional Hollywood mold. If you watched him play the frantic Claymore Gregg on the Ghost and Mrs. Muir, or later, laughing uproariously from his permanent seat on Match Game, his ascots, oversized glasses, and flamboyant delivery were unmistakable. Unlike leading men who were forced to play strict, straight-laced fathers, Reilly was hired specifically to be eccentric. The television networks of the late 1960s and 70s discovered a highly profitable middle ground with performers like him. They realized audiences were immensely entertained by his theatrical, campy energy. So, the studio system constructed a very specific space for him, a phenomenon often called the glass closet. The executives allowed him to be as colorful and animated as he wanted on camera, extracting every ounce of his unique comedic timing to boost their ratings. But that allowance came with an ironclad condition. He could never cross the line into actual confirmed reality. He had to navigate a constant game of evasion. The industry was perfectly comfortable with his mannerisms serving as a daily punchline, yet they demanded he maintain the illusion that his entire personality was just a television act. If a reporter ever asked a direct question about his off-screen life, the network expected a swift deflection. Acknowledging his reality as a gay man would have shattered the comfortable ambiguity the sponsors relied on. It is a strangely isolating existence to be celebrated for your authentic personality, while simultaneously being forbidden to claim it. Reilly spent decades as a staple of American living rooms, becoming a beloved fixture of daytime and primetime television. He provided endless, uninhibited entertainment to a public that the network deliberately managed, ensuring the actual man behind the television persona remained out of focus. Number 9. Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr was the ultimate symbol of unwavering truth on American television. As Perry Mason, he projected an image of absolute authority and moral clarity. Viewers tuned in every week to watch him extract the truth from guilty suspects, relying on his imposing presence and steady voice. But the man who made a career out of exposing secrets on camera was forced to construct one of the most elaborate fictions in television history off of it. In the 1950s and 60s, a leading man simply could not exist outside the strict boundaries of traditional masculinity. To protect a network franchise worth millions, Burr didn't just hide his identity. He was compelled to invent a heavily detailed, tragic past. Working alongside studio publicists, Burr distributed a heartbreaking backstory to the press. He frequently spoke of a first wife who died in a plane crash, a second wife who passed away from cancer, and a young son who succumbed to leukemia. It was an absolute fabrication. The network needed their primetime star to have a conventional history. When reality couldn't provide one, the Hollywood machine manufactured a devastating tragedy to shield him from any suspicion or industry gossip. It's hard to imagine the daily psychological weight of that arrangement. While millions of viewers found comfort in his steadfast television persona, Burr was quietly sharing his life with his actual partner, Robert Benavides, completely out of the public eye. He had to sit in interviews and mourn a family that never existed, just to satisfy an industry that found a fake tragedy more acceptable than a gay leading man. He maintained that protective shell for his entire career, essentially held hostage by the massive, profitable image he helped build. Number 10. Will Geer. When millions of Americans tuned into the Waltons every Thursday night, they weren't just watching a television show. They were tuning in for a weekly sermon on traditional family values, anchored by the comforting, folksy wisdom of Will Geer's Grandpa Walton. He was the ultimate patriarch, a salt-of-the-earth figure representing the moral foundation of a bygone America. The irony of Geer serving as the cornerstone of CBS's conservative rural fantasy is staggering. Long before he donned his suspenders for network television, Geer was a radical. He was a bisexual man who, in the 1930s, had a deeply formative relationship with Harry Hay, the future founder of the Mattachine Society, one of the earliest gay rights organizations in the country. But the television landscape of the 1970s did not hire radicals, and they certainly did not cast queer men to play the beloved grandfathers of America. Geer had already learned the hard way how brutally the industry could punish deviation. He was blacklisted in the 1950s for his political affiliations, effectively banished from Hollywood for years. By the time the role of Grandpa Walton came around, he understood exactly how the studio machinery operated. Survival meant absolute assimilation. The network leaned entirely on his warm, grandfatherly aura to sell a wholesome image to a highly traditional demographic. To keep his position and secure his livelihood, Geer had to silently erase the most revolutionary chapters of his own life. The man who had once navigated the underground, rebellious circles of the early queer rights movement was now contractually obligated to dispense safe, heavily sanitized morality lessons on a studio backlot. Geer spent his final years universally adored, recognized on every street corner as the quintessential American grandfather. Yet, that massive public affection was entirely conditional, based on an image that required the total omission of the life he actually lived. Number 11, Tab Hunter. If you tuned into NBC in the early 1960s for the Tab Hunter show, you were watching a masterclass in studio-manufactured perfection. Hunter was the undisputed golden boy of his era. With his blonde hair, athletic build, and effortless charm, he was aggressively marketed as the ultimate boy next door. The network built an entire sitcom around that very image, casting him as a swinging bachelor living in Malibu, endlessly pursued by beautiful women. But the distance between that coastal television fantasy and Hunter's actual life was immense. To maintain his status as a bankable heartthrob, he was essentially forced to hand over his entire identity to the Hollywood PR machine. The studios didn't just ask him to be discreet, they actively authored his private life. They orchestrated a relentless campaign of fake dates, pairing him up with prominent actresses for highly publicized evenings out, ensuring the gossip columnists had a steady stream of approved, traditional romance to write about. The pressure of living inside that PR bubble was suffocating. The studio system treated him less like a human being and more like a high-yield blue-chip stock. Any deviation from the all-American script, any whisper of his actual relationships with other men, would have tanked his value instantly. He was surrounded by executives, fixers, and publicists whose sole job was to keep the illusion intact, turning his daily routine into a tightly controlled movie set. Hunter played his part flawlessly for years, delivering exactly what the network and the sponsors demanded, but doing so meant accepting a profound level of isolation. He was universally adored by millions of fans who thought they knew exactly who he was, all while being contractually barred from ever showing them the truth. The golden boy of American television was, in reality, quietly trapped inside his own pristine image. Number 12, Cesar Romero. Cesar Romero was long established as Hollywood's quintessential Latin lover. By the time he transitioned into television, bringing his signature suave energy to endless sitcom appearances, and his famously campy run as the Joker on Batman, his brand was cemented in a very specific type of old-school masculinity. He was the man producers called whenever a script required a charming rogue to effortlessly sweep a leading lady off her feet. But that enduring public persona was a highly maintained piece of studio fiction. Romero was a gay man working in a mid-century entertainment landscape that traded heavily on traditional romantic archetypes. The networks and studios weren't just hiring an actor, they were renting an image. To protect that image, Romero became an essential, compliant cog in the Hollywood public relations machine. He was the industry's most reliable escort, constantly photographed arm in arm, with glamorous actresses at premieres and high-profile galas. It was a completely transactional arrangement. The press happily labeled him a confirmed bachelor, a polite, unspoken agreement used by columnists of the era, provided he never disrupted the fantasy they were selling to the American public. He was permitted to be charming and universally beloved, but only if his actual romantic life remained completely invisible. Romero operated perfectly within these rigid parameters for over half a century. He amassed a staggering resume across film and television, never suffering the abrupt industry blacklists that many of his peers faced when rumors surfaced. But the cost of that uninterrupted success was living in a state of perpetual performance. He spent his entire life functioning as a romantic prop for the entertainment industry, making millions of viewers swoon while carefully ensuring no one ever saw the man behind the tuxedo. Number 13, Jack Larson. To the kids rushing home from school in the 1950s, Jack Larson was the ultimate sidekick. As Jimmy Olsen on Adventures of Superman, he was the eager, wide-eyed cub reporter who constantly needed rescuing. He became an instant cultural icon, a permanent fixture in the golden age of American television. But that massive level of recognition brought a suffocating layer of visibility. In the 1950s, being a recognizable face on a hugely popular, family-friendly show meant your private life was essentially public property. Larson was gay, operating in an era where tabloid publications were becoming increasingly aggressive in hunting down industry scandals. The very role that made him a household name also trapped him in a constant state of hypervigilance. He understood perfectly that if the press uncovered his reality, it wouldn't just be a personal setback. It would be framed as a moral failure that threatened a highly profitable superhero franchise. The studio system placed him in a nearly impossible position. They aggressively marketed his boyish, innocent image, making it virtually impossible for casting directors to see him as anything else. When the show ended, Larson found himself heavily typecast. To continue acting meant fighting for roles in an industry that already viewed him as a one-dimensional character, all while maintaining the exhausting daily paranoia of keeping his off-screen life a secret. Rather than wait for the Hollywood machine to either expose him or completely discard him, Larson made a deliberate choice. He stepped away from acting almost entirely. He retreated behind the camera, transitioning into a highly respected playwright and producer. To find a professional space where he could finally breathe without constantly looking over his shoulder, he had to abandon the spotlight altogether. Number 14, Victor Buono. When Victor Buono appeared on screen, he commanded the entire frame. Whether he was playing the delightfully unhinged King Tut on Batman, or dropping into dozens of classic sitcoms as a pompous, over-educated antagonist, he brought a massive, theatrical energy to network television. He was a master of using his imposing physical size and booming Shakespearean voice as a comedic weapon. But that larger-than-life persona also served as an incredibly effective shield. In an industry obsessed with conventional leading men, Buono was always going to be the eccentric character actor. The network executives happily exploited his unique presence for laughs, often making his weight the center of the joke. Buono willingly leaned into that self-deprecation because he understood the unspoken rules of Hollywood's survival. If the audience was busy laughing at his size, they weren't looking too closely at his private life. Off-camera, the man who played television's loudest villains was intensely private and deeply intellectual. He was a gay man who spent his career writing poetry and living quietly, entirely separate from the frantic Hollywood social scene. The studio system provided him with steady, lucrative work, but only within a highly restricted framework. He was allowed to be intelligent, verbose, and funny, but he was categorically denied the space to exist as a fully realized, authentic person in the public eye. It is a profound paradox. Buono spent his entire professional life mastering the art of being unignorable on camera, yet he had to dedicate equal energy to remaining completely invisible once he went home. When his health failed him suddenly at the age of 43, the industry lost one of its most reliable scene stealers. He was a man who effortlessly filled every room he entered, but who spent his short life ensuring the world only ever saw the caricature they paid for. Number 15, Rock Hudson. If you wanted to define traditional American masculinity in the mid-20th century, you simply pointed to Rock Hudson. He was the towering, broad-shouldered leading man who seamlessly transitioned from box office dominance to television royalty. On series like McMillan and Wife, he projected an effortless, confident authority, anchoring the network's primetime schedule with the exact kind of conventional charm that sponsors demanded. But that flawless public monument was carefully constructed and ruthlessly protected by a studio system that essentially owned his reality. Hudson's career is perhaps the most striking example of the extreme lengths the industry would go to protect its investments. Years earlier, when tabloid magazines threatened to expose his private life, his powerful agent didn't just issue a standard denial. Instead, he orchestrated a highly publicized, entirely fabricated marriage to his own secretary. The entertainment machine forced Hudson to stand at an altar and pledge a false life just to maintain his commercial viability. The network executives knew exactly the kind of man they were employing. They gladly capitalized on his massive appeal while forcing him into an agonizing, decades-long performance of traditional romance. Hudson had to move through life heavily guarded, fully aware that the very industry celebrating his image would instantly dismantle his legacy if the illusion ever slipped. He carried this immense psychological burden through his entire television career, maintaining the facade of the suave, straight leading man deep into the 1980s. When his health ultimately failed, the protective studio walls could no longer hold the secret. The reality was pulled into the light, forcing a profound reckoning for a public that had spent decades admiring a carefully manufactured persona. He spent his life giving audiences exactly what they wanted, only to have his final, most vulnerable days defined by a truth the industry had spent millions trying to erase. Number 16, Merv Griffin. For decades, Merv Griffin was the ultimate architect of American middle-class entertainment. Before he built a billion-dollar empire creating game shows like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, he was a charming singer and a frequent guest actor across classic television. He projected an affable, easygoing presence that made him a trusted daily friend to millions of daytime viewers. But behind that legendary conversational warmth was a man executing a masterclass in deflection. Griffin understood the brutal mathematics of the television industry better than almost anyone. The empire he was building relied entirely on the continued trust and financial backing of a deeply traditional, mainstream audience. He knew that the corporate sponsors who happily funded his massive, family-friendly syndication deals would vanish the moment his private reality as a gay man became public knowledge. So, the man who made his fortune getting celebrities to open up on camera kept his own life entirely off the record. He utilized the immense wealth and power he accumulated not to break free from Hollywood's restrictive mold, but to construct a more comfortable, impenetrable fortress around himself. He navigated high society circles with a roster of glamorous female companions, including Eva Gabor, playing the role of the wealthy, eligible bachelor long past the point of believability. It is a fascinating, complex paradox. Griffin wasn't just a performer at the mercy of network executives. He eventually became the executive. Yet, he still felt compelled to operate within the exact same restrictive parameters that bound the actors he hired. He spent his entire life shaping the daily viewing habits of the American public, creating a sterilized, cheerful television landscape that systematically excluded the truth of his own existence. Number 17, Liberace. When you picture Liberace, you see the rhinestones, the grand piano, and the iconic candelabra. He was the highest paid entertainer in the world, an absolute master of excess who brought a staggering level of theatricality to his television specials and high-profile sitcom guest appearances. But that glittering extravagance was protected by a massive, aggressive legal defense. The entertainment industry was perfectly happy to broadcast his flamboyant campiness into millions of traditional living rooms, safely labeling it as harmless, eccentric showmanship. The network executives knew exactly what they were selling, but the moment the press dared to suggest that his on-screen persona reflected a gay reality off-screen, the machine went to war. In the 1950s, Liberace famously sued tabloid publications for merely implying he was homosexual. He had to stand in a courtroom, under oath, and vehemently deny his fundamental identity to protect his empire. The paradox is almost unbelievable. He wore heavy makeup, sequins, and feathered capes on network television. Yet he was forced to leverage the legal system to convince middle America he was just a traditional bachelor waiting for the right woman. He was effectively held hostage by the exact demographic that funded his lavish lifestyle. The middle-class audiences who adored his television appearances loved the spectacle, but they would have instantly dismantled his career if they had to acknowledge the reality behind the rhinestones. Liberace spent his life projecting a blinding level of confidence and wealth. Yet, beneath the grand pianos and the sold-out arenas, he was a man who went to the end of his life fiercely defending a studio-approved fiction, completely trapped by the audience that made him a king.